We're going to take a moment to look at radio drama production in hindsight of actually seeing or listening to a radio drama production. So what's so cool about radio drama? Well, don't forget, this was the 1930s. Radio was in nearly every household at this point in America's history. The connection to the outside world was through radio, and it was live and broadcast right then and there. And this included entertainment. As we know, they had theater and radio theater and shows and stories told on the radio. So it wasn't just like we have today, which is, the top hits broadcast and a news broadcast every now and then with a weather report and advertisements every 20 seconds. Okay. We also have radio that consists of radio dramas. Now, in ways, think about this, radio drama or theater over the radio can be even more powerful than TV because the images are visualized in the mind of the listener. And it's the task of the theater on the radio to give you what they want you to imagine. And you can always, more likely, if we have great imaginations, we can always imagine it better in our mind than a TV producer can capture that for us, let's say in the special effects of a movie. In fact, I almost find that with computer-generated graphics and special effects in movies nowadays, that they think they can do so much with artificial graphics and whatever, that they think it actually enhances the quality of the video or movie. I don't know. I've seen a lot of movies that rely too much on their CG to try to help the audience envision things that were never before possible on TV screen. And yet it's not as powerful as, let's say, the special effects from more primitive days of movie making, where they depended more upon the imagination of the viewer. So that's a whole other topic, but something for you to think about is the power of imagination. Why is it so important to develop your imagination? And the effect of radio drama on that makes it so that your imagination projects these images that could never have been captured in a TV show. You get to do it in your mind. And books are the same way. When we read a book, it can capture and describe an image for us that we then have to put together in our mind. And the one we capture might be even better than any movie or director could capture. Now, would you appreciate the story more if you knew that the actors worked very hard behind the scenes to write, produce, dress, rehearse, and finally perform the on the air live, all in one take? This is live. So this wasn't pre-recorded and played later. What you listened to was in one take by actors who had rehearsed and planned and practiced it to perform live. That was part of the appreciation of it, is that you tuned in live to live actors actually performing live on radio. We don't have that today. Okay? It's like a play. You go to a play and the actors are performing live in front of your face. Okay, we don't have that as much today either. So would you appreciate it if you knew that? Because that was live. And secondly, that the voice actors played multiple characters and changed their voices between scenes, and the sound effects needed to come on cue and sound good to create a realistic scene. And we saw sound effects of the heat ray or the planes or bombs or whatever, ticking of the clock, okay, microphone fuzz or static. Like those are all cued sound effects because you can't work through a visual image projected, but you can work through the audio that's projected to create the reality of your world. So keep that in mind. Do you appreciate that? Did you notice that as you were listening to the radio program that the sound effects were coming and going on cue, and that those were part of what the actors were playing while they were also saying their lines in character and in voice and in a cued sequence because they had dress rehearsed and practiced that performance. We're going to check out this feature here, and I'll add it to the video, as well as a link below, so that you can look into an idea about what behind the scenes of a radio drama might have looked like. I believe this comes from about the 1950s. It's a little cheesy, but it shows you a bit about the background of what happens behind the scenes during a radio drama.
Modest and unsung are these stars now checking their next radio script. They're sound effect girls who will raise the sash when the burglar is supposed to, or produce any other kind of noise which the noisiest script may demand. From the roar of battle to the sigh of a soft southern breeze, they've got what it takes. A most unusual occupation for gentle racketeers who give out with the noises when your favorite radio program goes on the air.
And now we bring you the great Gildersleeve.
Yeah.
We find the great Gildersleeve and his niece Marjorie driving home from a party in Summerfield.
Marjorie, what are we doing driving around in Jack Benny's Maxwell?
Oh, Uncle Mort.
Well, I hope we get home before it falls apart.
I just love riding in the rain. The air smells so wonderful.
Eee. Sounds wonderful, too.
Oh, don't be too cross, Uncle Mort. We'll soon be home.
Well, here we are. Better make a dash for it.
Here I go. And don't fall in the fish pond.
Yeah, don't worry.
Hurry, Uncle Mort.
I'm coming. Oh! Ooh.
Oh, dear. I told you to be careful.
I was careful, but somebody's always seems to be moving that pond. Hey! Phew, this'll be the death of me.
Oh, hurry and open the door.
I'm hurrying. Where are my keys? Oh, yes. Here they are.
Hurry. I'm freezing.
Look who's talking. My teeth are chattering. Those are not my teeth.
Please open the door, Uncle Mort.
Turn on the light.
Oh, heavens. You left the window open.
Oh, and the rug is ruined. By George, when I get my hands on that Leroy.
For goodness sakes, Uncle Mort, don't just stand there dripping. Close it.
Oh, certainly, my dear. While you close the door, I hope.
And don't just keep standing there dripping and dripping. Light the log fire.
All right.
Oh, my, but that fire feels good.
Yes, home, sweet home.
I'm sorry I was cross.
I forgive you, honey. Give your old uncle a kiss. Ooh.
So the next thing we want to look at is the idea of mass hysteria. Present historical speculation actually says that most people who listened to this drama knew that it was fiction, that they were tuning in to just a story. And they just tuned into a good story, but there were pockets of mass hysteria that was true. And it's still an interesting subject to think about today. So we read those newspaper articles at the beginning of this unit. And yes, we know that there was mass hysteria, crowds and blocks of paranoid people calling in here and there and running about, freaking out about these invading Martians. But it's an interesting topic to talk about even to this day. So let's look ahead and see, why is mass hysteria an interesting subject to discuss in light of our current pandemic? Well, what are some triggers to and instances of collective hysterical behavior in people? So we look at history. What are some of the triggers to this mob craziness, irrational kind of flow with the peer pressure type of thing? Well, it could be violence or political upheaval causing mass hysteria and freaking out of people. Now, there was this thing called the Great Fear during the French Revolution, 1789. Because of the political upheaval prior, just at the very early stages of the French Revolution, there was this great panic and fear and like this sense of apprehension about what might happen to the peasants for their revolt. And the great fear was kind of this suspicion that then was felt by all of those peasantry and whatnot. Okay. Now, the result of that was this mass hysteria of them going into hiding. Then they realized that nothing really was happening, and they were fearful for no reason. So what they then went out and did is they terrorized the countryside. They realized that they had power. So their mass hysteria actually flipped from being paranoid and in hiding to being out and about, rampaging and ravaging the countryside and going in this mob and just committing violence. Okay. So there's an instance way back in 1789 of the whole country being involved in this mass hysteria. There is examples of fiction or misleading media, such as the War of the Worlds, which we've looked at, which leads lots of people to believe something that's untrue and all act in a hysterical way together. We have this mob mentality idea where people come together and act irrationally in a way they might never act otherwise on their own or with a better group of people. And you could just go back to the 2011 Stanley Cup in Vancouver and the Vancouver riots after that game, where police cars were flipped over and burned, and people thought it was great to go and act in this crazy mob and just kind of have this riot. I think, were they really, really angry? Well, maybe a few were, but I think a lot of people just joined the mob because that's what humans tend to do. They get hysterical, irrational, and they join that mob. I don't know if you remember that. 2011 Vancouver riots, crazy. And then pandemic and supply fear, perhaps. So we see that today, the COVID-19 toilet paper scramble, 2020. Okay, or whatever else people are scrambling for to get. Lysol wipes and disinfectants and face masks and whatever. Okay, there's a hysteria, a panic, and people are, bulldozing each other over to get these things. Now, if you can look back, there's also one that happened in 1974 where they thought there was going to be a national toilet paper shortage. So people went out and just overbought them, and it was just a scam. It was just a joke. But people still reacted with fear. If somebody said tomorrow there's going to be an oil shortage, fill up your tanks, everybody would react to that and say, oh, I'm going to fill up my tank, and there would be no fuel left because there's more demand for something than they were prepared for. And then that just accentuates the hysteria. So an interesting thing to look at. Our story gives us a discussion point of mass hysteria, human action to it. And I think the main point in this discussion is, how can we always keep our cool, keep our head when the crowd around us might not be? That's easier said than done because we are kind of social beings. We react the way people around us are reacting. We're very influenced by that. So how can we keep our cool, keep our head? Because that's when we might actually be in a position to survive when everybody else is scrambling for something. Can we keep our cool? We'll see. I think it's a cool connection to our current world. Okay, I know I'm blocking this, but this word says popular media and human reaction to it. So let's discuss this theme. What media do we consume today? Media, as I said, is earlier in some of these parts, is messaging or communications that we get, either written, audio, through a visual, through imagery, through a combination of all those things, and we consume it. We take it in and we interpret it, and then we do stuff with it. We can also ignore it and whatever, but normally it's meant to communicate something to us. Now, what media do we have? Well, media we have newspapers, we have radio, we have TV, we have actually 24/7 news that's delivered to us by TV. We have internet consisting of blogs, YouTube, newspaper that powers social media, and we have social media today. And we're kind of all sharing news and information, except our sources might not necessarily be a credible journalist, but it might also be a neighbor or a friend or somebody that we have connected with on social media. But we're getting news and we're getting perspectives on the world. We're consuming media all the time today. What about in 1938? Well, there was newspaper, and there was radio. Okay, they didn't have widespread television yet. They didn't have internet, certainly. They didn't have 24/7 news casts. They didn't have social media. So what do they have? Well, they had newspapers and they had radios. So both of these are actually, at this point in time, competing for audiences. Newspapers were in print. By the time of the 1930s, they'd been in print for centuries. They were a well-established, credible source of news. Newspapers. You want a good old source of news, read a newspaper. You know the little newspaper boy on the corner? Read all about it. Get your daily newspaper, and everybody's reading their daily newspaper on their way to work or whatever. Or in the morning, when they're sipping their coffee, they read the newspaper. Our grandfathers and great-grandfathers did that. We don't so much. I mean, it's a completely different media world that we live in. Now, radio was novel and flashy because it was relatively new. I don't know when radio was invented, late 1800s or something, okay, mid 1800s. So in terms of it being a household item, though, it was like a decade or two. It wasn't that old, so it was new. It was new, flashy. It was a source of speedy news, steady, consistent, constant information and entertainment. It was a different form of media for the people, but it was also more appealing. What would you rather do? Okay, what would you rather do? Watch a movie or read a book? Okay, what would you rather do? Read a newspaper or listen to the radio? Okay, it's also easier and more convenient, whatever. Now, newspapers at that time had an opportunity to call into question the responsibility of radio following the broadcast. And so now it becomes an issue of competition and pointing out what's more credible or not. At a time when newspapers are on a decline because they're competing with radio. Now we see that same issue today where newspapers are on a severe decline. Over the last 50 years, newspapers by the scores have gone out of business. You used to be able to make a career out of starting a newspaper in your town. And you publish the local newspaper, and maybe there are several competing newspapers, but it could be a career. Okay, nowadays, no, you can't just publish a newspaper and be successful. Okay, you're publishing perhaps an online, blog or media network or whatever to get your voice out, but not a newspaper, not a print newspaper. Okay, in fact, newsprint, big company newsprint newspapers nowadays are, going out of business or they're going all online, and you have to have a newspaper subscription or whatever. Okay, so let's bring it back to our modern time with a couple considerations to think about us and how we consume media. How are we media literate? Can we tell a true story from a misleading one, especially in the age of fake news? I think this points to a very relevant thing today, is what sort of power do we give to media agencies such as CBC, CTV, Global News in Canada? What about in the United States, where you've got news agencies that are always being accused by the president of being fake news? Okay, journalism is very powerful, and they can spread a narrative that we can either gobble up and eat without criticism, or do we have to be a little bit more judgmental of that nowadays? There are so many agendas, there are so many perspectives going around that it's a very difficult world to navigate in terms of, do we believe or do we follow a media story just because the media says it? Do we have appropriate criticism of the media we consume? Just like in the 1930s, would we say that the newspapers were absolutely correct and not misleading? Did they report on it accurately? Well, today we would say no. I think they blew out of the water a little bit about the vast, amount of people who were duped by the story that didn't actually happen the way the newspapers said. So there wasn't a credibility there. But then on the flip side, we look back in the 1930s at radio and we say, was radio all that authentic and believable? Were they responsible? No, because they did go out and deceive people, and they duped people into thinking that the War of the Worlds was actually happening. So that's maybe an irresponsible use of media, and we have to be critical as we're listening to that to realize this is just a TV show or a radio show and not actual news. So it does require criticism. And does objective, unbiased journalism exist? That's an interesting question. I think that we all tend, as you guys begin to consume media more and more, that you're going to kind of float towards that which shares your biases. And I know I'm like that too. You seek out news you want to hear versus looking at it maybe more objectively. And I think that's our constant struggle, is that it's very difficult for us to find objective, unbiased news and to make our own opinions on it, because we're always using our own biased opinions to judge that news. Okay? So, a very interesting topic, but I think it's important because you guys are all going to be media consumers in the future, and either you do it obliviously or you do it critically. Now, you can either do it obliviously and fall for the believing a story like the War of the Worlds that wasn't actually happening. Okay, you can be duped by media, or you can be critical and look at it and realize, oh, this is, and be problem solver and figure it out. Realize, oh, this was just a radio show. How fast is media able to spread information today? Well, it's a completely different story today. It is spread as instant as somebody posts a notification about some sort of event happening. And journalism and journalists are trying to pick up on that trail and give it to you as fast as they can, almost live, right? And you can see those posts come out within minutes of that event happening nowadays. Whereas before, you might have to wait till the next morning to get that newspaper, or perhaps the next 2 mornings, as that news eventually trickles to the journalists who are writing articles in a newspaper way back in the day. Radio would give us relatively instant, but even then, at this time of internet and social media, where stories come to us so rapidly, okay, we get it almost instantly, or have access to that news almost instantly. And that is difficult because sometimes we need to digest and chew and discover and explore a situation a little bit more before we go and report the facts on it. Because oftentimes the story is released to us before the facts are really there. So keep that in mind too. We are used to fast, instant news, but sometimes to get the full picture, it takes a bit of criticism and a little bit more time to develop the full picture of the story, if we can even ever figure it out.